You are about to enter the medieval world, a place not of chivalry and shining armor, but of aching backs, scratchy tunics, and smoky thatch-roofed homes. A time where the year was marked not by holidays or celebrations, but by planting, waiting, harvesting, and sometimes hunger. In this episode, we will explore what it truly meant to be a medieval peasant, one of the millions whose names have vanished into dust, but whose daily rhythm once shaped the land. Then, we'll follow the tale of a man who rose from those very fields to challenge the powers above. Wat Tyler, a voice for the voiceless. Later, we'll drift through the spiritual fog of the Middle Ages, pondering the magnetic pull of holy relics and the ever-elusive Holy Grail. And finally, we'll step silently through the castle halls, where silken sleeves hid quiet cruelties and privilege carried a different kind of burden. Let the world around you soften now. Set down the weight of your own day, and imagine yourself beneath a low wooden beam, the faint scent of smoke in the air. As we begin, imagine yourself waking not to an alarm, but to the pale grey light leaking through wooden shutters. Outside, the rooster calls. Inside, it is cold. The hearth has long since gone out. You pull yourself from a straw mattress shared with others, the smell of old wool and last night's fire clinging to the air. Your tunic is stiff with yesterday's sweat. Your feet are calloused and bare. This is the life of a medieval peasant, a life not measured in days off or leisure, but in labor, endless, bone-deep labor. The year begins not with a celebration, but with frost. In late winter the soil is stubborn. Fields must be prepared, tools mended and manure carted by hand. Oxen trudge slowly ahead, their breath fogging in the cold. You guide the plow through thick, unyielding earth. Your hands blister, then harden. Time becomes weather. You rise when the sun does and rest only when the light dies. Most peasants were tied to the land. Serfs, they were called. Not quite slaves, but not free either. You could not move. You could not marry without permission. You owed labor to the lord, who gave you strips of land in return, narrow, scattered patches that made farming frustratingly inefficient. And so you toiled, for your family, your village, your soul, and for someone else's grain store. Most days you ate what you could grow. Barley bread, pottage made of beans and weeds, a few onions. Meat was rare, a luxury. Salted pork, maybe in winter. Eggs, if the hens were kind. Hunger was not a stranger, but a frequent, lingering guest. In bad years, and there were many, crops failed. Rain lingered too long or vanished entirely. Disease took the livestock. Grain rotted. And still the Lord demanded his share. You watched your children thin, your neighbors vanish. Famine did not come with flames and fury. It came with silence, with smaller portions, with the quiet horror of nothing left to grind. Clothes that itch, homes that leak. Your clothing was homespun wool, dyed in dull browns or grey-blue with simple herbs. It was heavy when wet and itchy when dry. Your shoes, if you had them, were leather tied with strips. Nothing kept out the cold fully. Your house was one room, shared with your family and often your animals. A central hearth smoked constantly, as chimneys were rare. Walls were wattle and daub, woven sticks coated in mud and dung, and roofs were thatch, always in danger of leaking or burning. There were no glass windows, only shutters, no beds, only straw, no privacy, only routine. And yet this was normal. This was home. Sundays offered a brief rest, mass at the local church, a small gathering, a blessing, but even religion was tangled with duty. You owed the church its tithe, 1/10 of what little you produced, and you owed the Lord labor, ploughing his fields, repairing his roads, baking at his oven, milling at his mill. If your daughter married, the Lord might demand a fee. If your son died, he might demand your best animal. These were not seen as unfair. They were life. The peasants understood their place in the order of things and questioned it only rarely. Still, not every moment was suffering. There were songs, Long, simple tunes passed down from mouths too poor to read. There were gatherings after harvest, crude ale in wooden mugs, games played with bones and sticks, laughter despite the mud. Weddings brought dancing, and saints' days brought colour to a grey world. Children played when they could, barefoot and wild. Women gathered herbs and traded news. Men carved tools with care and skill. Even the poorest carved out moments of contentment because they had to. And there was the land, always the land. It might betray you with drought or bless you with a good yield, but it was yours to work, to know, to endure. There were no doctors here. A midwife might help with childbirth. A healer might offer herbs. But for the most part, sickness came and went as it pleased. Wounds festered, teeth rotted, fevers burned through the young and the old. You grew up fast. You aged young. By 40 you were bent, your joints stiff, your breath shorter, but you knew your field, your family, your church bell. You knew the world around you, and even if you didn't own it, you belonged to it. And so the seasons turned. Fields were sown, then harvested. Rain came, then snow. The wheel turned slowly, relentlessly, softly. Let us now turn our gaze to one man, a man who dared to stop that wheel even for a moment. Imagine again that same muddy village lane, the same calloused hands and smoke-stained air. But this time, someone is whispering. A name, a grievance, a spark of discontent passing from hut to hut. His name was Wat Tyler, a man of few surviving facts, but lasting ripples. The year is 1381. England is not at peace. The 100 Years' War grinds on in the background, draining coffers and spirits alike. The Black Death, that silent, invisible reaper, had swept through decades earlier and left scars that never quite healed. Whole villages gone, labourers fewer, land abandoned, and yet the taxes never stopped. They only rose. To understand Wat Tyler, we must understand his world, not of kings and courts, but of carts and coin. The peasant class had endured centuries of servitude, but the plague, strangely, had shifted the balance. With so many dead, labour became scarce. For the first time in living memory, a poor man could ask for better wages, and sometimes receive them. But the nobility and crown did not like this new leverage. Laws were passed to freeze wages. Serfs who left their lords in search of better pay were hunted down. And then, to make matters worse, came the poll tax, a flat tax levied on every man and woman, rich or poor, regardless of ability to pay. It was not the amount, but the principle and the repetition. 3 times in 4 years. The third time, the collectors came with muscle. In Kent and Essex, the fuse was lit. There is no grand tapestry telling Wat Tyler's early life. Most believe he was a roof tiler, hence the name, a skilled tradesman modestly above the poorest peasants, but very much part of their world. Some say he joined the revolt after an official assaulted his daughter while collecting the tax. Others say he was simply chosen, a man with clarity and calm, who could speak plainly, who inspired trust. No royal education, no fine robes. But when he spoke, people listened, and they followed. Word spread faster than law. Villagers armed themselves with farming tools, crude weapons, even sticks and stones. Monks, craftsmen, labourers, all began to march. But this was no disorganized riot. They had demands, and they chanted them. No serfdom, no lordship. A king who hears his people. Wat Tyler led the southern forces, marching from Kent toward London. Alongside him were priests like John Ball, whose sermons were fiery with rebellion. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? A rhetorical sledgehammer against centuries of hierarchy. They reached London's outskirts in June. The city gates opened. Whether from sympathy or fear, no one quite knows. The rebels entered, tens of thousands strong. They destroyed tax records, burned manorial archives, executed officials notorious for their cruelty. But unlike common mobs, they left private homes untouched. Their anger was not blind. King Richard II, just 14 years old, agreed to meet them. In the first meeting, Tyler presented a charter calling for an end to serfdom, fair wages, and equal justice under law. Surprisingly, the king agreed. For a moment, it seemed a peaceful end might be possible. But history, especially peasant history, rarely unfolds so gently. On June 15th, Tyler met the king again at Smithfield, in the heart of the city. Accounts differ. Some say Tyler was calm, even courteous. Others accuse him of insolence. What is clear is that tension hung thick in the air. Suddenly, during the meeting, Tyler was attacked, stabbed by the Mayor of London, William Walworth, and finished by royal soldiers. His body was dragged to St. Paul's and beheaded, his head placed on a spike, a grim warning against rising too high. The king turned to the rebel crowd, claiming he would be their new leader. Without Tyler, the crowd dispersed. The rebellion lost its spine. Within days, the promises were broken. Serfdom remained. Justice did not come. Wat Tyler was gone, but his name lived on, whispered in taverns, etched into the edge of memory. The revolt failed in the short term. Its leaders were hunted, hanged, silenced. But the idea, the seed of resistance, had taken root. And though the laws stayed, something had changed. The ruling class saw the people could rise, and slowly, over generations, the chains of serfdom began to rust and loosen. Today, Wat Tyler is both ghost and symbol, of defiance, of injustice, of a man who spoke when others were afraid. So the fields went back to their rhythm, the villages to their silence. But now and then, someone remembered the man who tried to change the order of things. Let us leave the dust of revolt behind now, and walk into a quieter mystery, one not of coin or caste, but of belief. Imagine yourself walking into a stone church on a cool spring morning. Light filters through stained glass in pale blues and reds, falling softly onto worn stone floors. The scent of old incense lingers in the air, mingling with beeswax and damp stone. You sit on a wooden bench, the kind that creaks under the slightest shift. Around you, statues watch in silence. At the altar, a single chalice waits, humble in form, yet charged with meaning. This is the world of medieval belief, where myth was never just a story, but a breath away from truth. Among all the relics and sacred objects, none captured the imagination of the medieval mind quite like the Holy Grail. In some tales, it was a cup, the very cup Christ used at the Last Supper. In others, it was the vessel that caught his blood at the crucifixion. To some, it was not a physical object at all, but a symbol of purity, of divine mystery, of unreachable perfection. The Grail first appeared in literature in the 12th century, in the works of Chrétien de Troyes, a French poet. But it quickly spread, whispered from parchment to parchment, pulpit to pulpit, mind to mind. In the age of relics and pilgrimage, it was not unusual to believe a cup might hold salvation. After all, bones of saints were said to heal, and slivers of the true cross were scattered in chapels across Europe. But the Grail was different. It was never found, and that was part of its power. You've likely heard of the Knights of the Round Table, Arthur, Lancelot, Galahad, Percival. But in the medieval imagination, these were not just fictional figures, they were moral mirrors. The Grail stories transformed these knights into seekers, not of war, but of wisdom, of grace. The quests they undertook were not for gold or territory, but for something higher, something elusive, something holy. In these tales, only the purest could find the Grail, only the innocent, the devout, the uncorrupted. Sir Galahad, often portrayed as the son of Lancelot, was the one who succeeded, his heart unblemished, his mind serene. But finding the Grail did not bring him wealth. It brought an end. He vanished from the world, lifted into heaven, a reward, yes, but also a disappearance. For the medieval listener, the message was clear. Some truths lie beyond the reach of the impure. Some knowledge demands sacrifice. Outside of legend, the people of medieval Europe sought tangible closeness to the divine. Pilgrimages were common, long, painful journeys to visit relics, a bone fragment, a vial of holy water, a strip of cloth said to have touched the Virgin Mary. These were not souvenirs. They were doorways. Cathedrals claimed to house the Grail itself. In Spain, in England, in the Holy Land, each had its story, its miracle, its guardians, but no one ever proved anything. The Grail was always near, yet out of reach. Still, people believed, and belief shaped their choices. A peasant might give his only coin to touch a relic. A noble might fund a chapel in hopes of spiritual favor. Knights rode to war under banners bearing crosses, convinced their cause was righteous. Faith was not passive. It was a current running beneath every action. With such power, of course, came peril. Some sought the Grail not for truth, but for power. Others saw it in dreams or in visions brought on by fasting, illness, or solitude. Monks reported seeing lights, pilgrims claimed revelations, and sometimes entire sects arose, declaring they had found it or knew the one who would. Madness wrapped itself in devotion, but not all madness is chaos. For many, the Grail offered structure, a path to walk, a meaning to impose on an unpredictable world. When crops failed, when war came, when sickness crept through the village, the idea of something perfect, something untouched, was a balm. And so, generation after generation, the stories continued. The seekers never stopped, and the Grail remained, just ahead, just beyond, just out of reach. By the late Middle Ages, the Grail had changed. It was less a relic to be found and more a metaphor, for virtue, for purpose, for inner peace. Even now, in modern language, we say a Holy Grail to mean something ultimate, something long sought and rarely found. But in the medieval night by candlelight, as wind rustled the thatch and monks sang softly in Latin, the Grail was not a metaphor, it was real. And whether it sat on a faraway altar or shimmered in a dream or lived only in the space between silence and hope, it mattered. Let the candle burn low now. Let the myths return to sleep. In our final journey tonight, we will climb the stone steps of the manor. We will walk the polished halls of the elite, and we will discover that even in soft beds, life was not always soft. Imagine yourself walking beneath a stone archway, your footsteps muffled by rushes spread across cold flagstone floors. Above you, tapestries hang thick on the walls, not only for beauty, but for warmth. A corridor turns, light flickers from iron sconces, and a hush hangs in the air, broken only by the soft shuffle of velvet slippers. This is not a battlefield, nor a village lane. This is the world of the nobility, a place of silk sleeves and whispered secrets, of soft bedding and strict etiquette. And yet, comfort did not mean freedom. The peasant toiled beneath the sky, the noble lived behind walls. The day began not with a rooster but with attendants. A nobleman did not rise alone. His valet entered first, warming the room with coals if it was winter, then helping him dress layer by layer, linen undershirt, hose, tunic, outer garments, perhaps a surcoat or fur-lined cloak depending on the weather. Each garment bore meaning, color, texture and cut, all spoke to rank and wealth. Meanwhile, the lady of the house might be assisted by a maidservant, her hair braided intricately, her gown laced and arranged. Perfumed oils masked the lack of frequent bathing. A delicate veil might cover her head, or a circlet of silver if she were of especially high status. Meals were served in a great hall, but the nobility rarely dined in isolation. Meals were performances, a place to show refinement, wealth and power. Spoons and knives were used with care. Napkins were expected. Guests were seated according to rank, not affection. The food, rich in spices and variety, might seem a luxury, peacock, swan, or spiced meat pies, but it often left the noble gut troubled. Sugar and vinegar were overused, and teeth, even for the wealthy, were seldom well maintained. Outside the hall, falcons might be flown, gardens walked, or correspondence dictated. For the noble lady, embroidery and estate management filled the hours. For the lord, estate business, court appearances or hunting parties dominated the rhythm of the day. It was a life curated to seem serene. But beneath the surface, all was not as it seemed. Nobility did not mean liberty. Every word, gesture and movement was watched and weighed. One did not slouch. One did not laugh too loud. One did not speak unless the moment allowed it. Even children of noble birth were raised not for joy, but for duty. Marriages were arranged. Affection was not always part of the arrangement. Daughters were traded for alliances, and sons were trained for war or inheritance. A noble girl might be married at 14. A boy might be sent to another castle to serve as a page by age 7, beginning his slow climb toward knighthood. Love, when it came, had to hide. Affairs of the heart rarely aligned with the marriage bed. Castles were close quarters, and emotion had few outlets. So secrets grew like ivy on stone. A glance in the corridor, a letter tucked into a book, a servant who knew too much. Affairs among the nobility were not rare, nor were they always consensual. Punishments, however, were seldom equal. A noblewoman caught in adultery might be disgraced, cloistered, or worse. A nobleman's indiscretions, on the other hand, might be forgiven, provided they remained discreet. And discretion was its own skill. The castle walls were thick, but they had ears. The nobility were never truly alone. A handmaid might sleep on a rush mat at the foot of a lady's bed. A squire might stand silently as his lord spoke of conspiracies. A cook might overhear the timing of a secret departure. The people who made comfort possible were the unseen audience to every act. And though they could not speak, they remembered. A spilled wine cup, a hastily closed door, a tear that escaped during morning prayers. The castle was not just stone and silk, it was tension, polished, perfumed, and always on display. Even the richest noble could not escape death, illness, or fear. A minor cut could become fatal. A courtly misstep could mean exile. A shift in royal favor could strip everything away. And beyond that, there was the spiritual cost. The church taught that riches were a temptation and that pride led to damnation. So nobles donated to monasteries, paid for prayers, and built chapels, not always from faith, but from fear. Their halls might echo with laughter during a feast, but at night, when the candles dimmed and the corridors fell silent, there was only the ticking of time. And so, the castle rests. The servants are quiet, the rushes replaced, the embers cooling in the hearth. We have walked the fields and the throne rooms. We have touched myth and heard the voice of revolt. Now, let us gently close this evening's journey.